Congressman Hall, I want to ask you about creating jobs, but first I want to refer back to something you said in your opening remarks. You referred to this as not being a very good time to be holding office. Everyone's very critical right now of government. So I would like to ask you about that. Certainly, there's been a lot of criticism across the board of all political candidates. It does, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. But let's talk about the Democrats. You control both the chambers of the Congress and the White House, but things don't seem to be getting better, so obviously a lot of that negative attention is being focused on the Democrats. Could you please speak to why that is, why things are not getting better?
Well, I think, unfortunately, as someone said, you don't get credit for keeping a bad situation from getting worse. And I believe that the Recovery Act, which is otherwise called the stimulus, but it's the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act, stopped this country from going into a depression instead of a recession. Last week there was a story in the front page of the New York Times saying that TARP is not only going to pay back all the money to the taxpayer, but probably make the taxpayer and the U.S. Treasury a profit. These are things that were started under President Bush, by the way. I was a freshman in 2008. 4 years ago, in that fall of 2008, 2 years ago, when President Bush and Secretary Paulson came to us and asked for that funding. But it has turned out that the money didn't disappear into a black hole. It has come back to the Treasury and to the taxpayer. Just to go to the jobs issue, if I may, my opponent has signed a pledge not to ask for what she calls earmarks, which are in fact appropriations. The Constitution says the House of Representatives is the body that can start the appropriation process. And I have fought for $21 million for schools in Westchester, $5 million for energy efficiency projects, $6 million for Camp Smith, for renovations at Camp Smith in Westchester, $7 million for the Montrose VA in Westchester, paving of I-684 and the Taconic, fixing the bridges, which were on the endangered bridge list that came out after the I-35 bridge collapse in Minnesota. All those things hired people with jobs that can't be outsourced, that keep us safer, and that keep those projects from going on your property tax, from raising your property tax. So if we don't spend that money, if we don't have an aggressive advocate in D.C. in the House of Representatives to fight for our fair share, that money is going to Texas or Alaska or some other state. And I would rather bring it home because you already paid for it once. You shouldn't have to pay for it twice.
Okay, Congressman, thank you.
All right, let's talk guns. And I'll pose I'll pose the first question to Dr. Hayworth. Doctor, we saw the assault weapon ban lapse. It sunset before. Right now, 4 states have conceal and carry laws where you can walk into a bar with a gun, and 18 states are considering it. You can't get on a plane if you're on a terror watch list, but you can. But you don't get any background check, if you want to get a gun and you're on the terror watch list. Are you satisfied with our gun laws now? Are they too onerous, or are they too lax?
I support the Second Amendment as an individual right. And to my knowledge, someone who is on a terrorist watch list cannot get a gun. That is my knowledge of current law. I feel that current laws are ample to prevent gun-related crimes that are committed by any citizen who lawfully owns a gun. We do have a tremendous problem with criminals committing crimes and using weaponry that spans the gamut of what you can imagine. But certainly, lawful gun owners are not the men and women whom we find committing crimes, particularly with illegal weapons. So I do not feel that we need to increase our gun laws at this time.
If you have a vote, would you have extended the assault weapon ban, or would you have let it sunset?
The assault weapon ban can sunset because, in fact, what is covered in that ban does not qualify as an assault weapon. They are not automatic weapons.
Same question, Congressman, about our gun laws right now. Some people say they're too restrictive, that the government's coming after people's right to bear arms. Other people saying that they're too lax, given some of the data out there. What's your answer?
Well, I basically think we should enforce the laws we have on the books. And I also support Second Amendment rights. But I don't think that a hunter needs an assault weapon. I don't particularly approve of hunting wolves or polar bears from aircraft. And I think that the federal government should stay out of the way when a municipality like Washington, D.C., for instance, decides that they, home rule involved, and former murder capital of the United States, for instance, that their elected officials decide that they want to have some further restriction within their jurisdiction. That's something that I think a state or New York City or Washington, D.C. should have the right to decide.
Thank you, Congressman.
Okay. Congressman, you brought up transportation, infrastructure, and some bridge projects before, so I'd like to talk about the Tappan Zee Bridge. Certainly it's a critical component to the future growth of Westchester and the region. Millions and millions of dollars have been spent repairing this aging span, and there have been countless delays in what was going to, the final plans for what was going to be done with the bridge. It appears now that we are going to get a new Tappan Zee Bridge. But however, the question comes down to who's going to pay for it. The estimates now are a price tag of $16 billion, and that's in 2010 dollars. So while there's been talk of a private-public partnership, no one is saying where this money is going to come from. And I wanted to ask you, you serve on the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. Why do you think we are at this point where we are now with the Tappan Zee Bridge, given this is such an important project? Why is there no means to fund this?
Well, I think there should be means to fund it, and this kind of goes to one of the points that my opponent was making here before, in that we should let people keep their money and not tax them. And I remember having this discussion with Kieran Lawler, my opponent, 2 years ago, who said similarly, why don't we let people keep their money? They know best what to do with it. And the answer was because you're not going to build a sewage treatment plant, or you're not going to build a bridge over a river. You're not going to pave a highway. It takes certain things only governments can and will do, and to do that they need revenue, and the way they get it is by taxing. The decision we as a country or as a community need to make is what is reasonable in terms of what needs to be built, what needs to be repaired, what needs to be fixed, and how to pay for it. The Tappan Zee Bridge will be built. I'm going to be fighting as your representative, if I'm still your representative, for as much appropriations for us as a donor state that pays more, 20% more in taxes to the federal government than we get back. I will be in Washington fighting to bring that money home. My opponent, as I understand it, has taken a written pledge not to ask for earmarks, which would include something like the Tappan Zee Bridge or the Beacon-Newburgh Bridge, which also needs to be replaced.
Okay, thank you, sir. Dr. Hayworth, you want to respond to that? What should the federal government's role be in funding this project?
Infrastructure is important, and when I talk about you keeping your hard-earned money, I mean it with all my heart. But it is also true that when I say that, I mean that we have to have prudent stewardship of the funds that the public does need to spend. We collectively have a federal government, a state government, and local governments to deal with, and I think we all willingly take on that responsibility. When we become aggrieved is when we perceive that the federal government is spending our money recklessly, and that is the problem that we have now. The stimulus was supposed to be devoted actually to infrastructure by and large, and only about 10% of the stimulus dollars actually went to infrastructure. That would have been an enormously useful thing to do, including directing it toward crucial projects like bridge, road, and tunnel maintenance. None of us, including me, emphatically want to have the Tappan Zee Bridge collapse beneath our cars, and I am all for that kind of prudent spending. The problem we have with our federal government is that it has not been prudent, it has been reckless, and I intend to assure that the federal government spends your money, your hard-earned money, to a lesser extent, and when it does so, that it spends it on what we need the federal government to do. Interstate transportation is a legitimate responsibility of the federal government. I think there is a role for the federal government somewhere with the Tappan Zee Bridge, and I intend to pursue it with vigor.